workshop here in Ottumwa. And of course I said, sure, this is a great opportunity for us, why wouldn't we do that? So then Jeff Geertz got on board and started talking about maybe doing a application for any National Endowment for the Arts grant. And I guess Michael also said that they were thinking about doing this fall workshop in Ottumwa on placemaking. And of course they had noticed all the work that was going on in Ottumwa with the facade improvements and the apartments that we had done and the green roofs, and we're excited about the projects that were already happening and the plans that we had, and we knew that we had lots of plans. So that started us out on this journey a year ago, right before RightBright, and I remember that because RightBright was here last year, and now RightBright's going on again, but it's not coming through Ottumwa this year. So anyway, since that time, we have received the NEA grant, which was a very long process, and National's dollars, and I want to thank the other funders that have gone along. I've talked a lot about the NEA grant, but haven't given thanks to the other funders. So Main Street Ottumwa has skin in the game, City of Ottumwa, Ottumwa Regional Legacy Foundation, Main Street Iowa, Iowa Economic Development Authority, University of Iowa Business Leadership Network, National Association of Realtors, the Southeast Iowa Regional Board of Realtors, Community First Credit Union, and People's State Bank. So I want to thank all of them for making this possible. And now the hard work starts, and it's up to us as the community to really make the most of this possibility for downtown Ottumwa. One of the first things we did as a committee after receiving the funds was hired the Better Block Foundation, and they're here with us tonight. This is our kickoff. So I'm going to introduce Jason Roberts, and he can introduce the rest of his team. He's going to give us a short presentation and then get some feedback from the community, because it's really, well, he talks about this project and says, I or we, it's us that this is up to. It's our ideas and possibly our help as well. So, Jason?
Great to be here, guys. From Dallas, Texas. So I was saying earlier, this is like winter to us outside, so thank you for bringing us in the middle of summer. I'm just going to get started here. So I'm going to start, I've got a little hum here. How far I can reach the laptop here. There we go. So you guys know my background. I do a lot of urban planning and architectural kind of consulting work with cities, but my background wasn't in urban planning or architecture. I actually was your IT guy. I fixed your computer for a living. And so I spent most of my days in rooms that looked like this. So they were very cold and overly air conditioned, very dark. I would change out wires and fix servers for a living. So during the day I didn't have much of a social life, but at nighttime my one cool factor was I played in rock bands. So in these rock bands, I'd go around with my friends and we'd go around the country and typically play in places that people said were the bad parts of town and old empty buildings. And oftentimes we would work with a lot of other artists in neighborhoods and try to figure out what they were doing to turn things back on. I found artist communities were great about making something out of nothing. So that was kind of, I was getting to meet a lot of great people around the country and see a lot of these great old buildings and try to daydream a little bit about how to make things work. But I also like to show this picture a lot too. I traveled a bit, and this is actually in Paris. It's in Montmartre, France. I remember I first saw this picture, I remember thinking, man, I wish this was in my neighborhood. If it was in there, I would go to every morning and have a cup of coffee. I'd want to retire around here. I love the little streets. I wish I could live above it. I'd ask friends about places like this. What do you think about places like this? And they're like, man, this is beautiful. We put this on postcards. We want our kids to work in places like this. And I said, well, if we all collectively wish we had more places that look like this, then why do we keep building places that look like this? And that was the frustration and it started the early parts of our work of the things that we build actually have a byproduct of making people feel good or feel bad, places that people want to celebrate, places that people want to linger in, want to grow old in, and places like this aren't places that you ever want to stay in for very long. They're not places that will ever be on postcards, but we were building a lot of these in our communities. But I was also traveling a lot, One other thing, I was also looking at some other examples. This is my mom's hometown of Fletcher, Oklahoma. About 800 people live in this town. And I talked to her about her Main Street. And she'd say, well, yeah, our Main Street was great. We all knew the grocer, and we all knew the pharmacist, and we knew the folks, the beauticians, and everybody kind of kept their eyes out on us as kids. We had our parades on the blocks, so we had parades, and we have all these activities. These were our special social gathering places. But they kind of went away. And we're trying to figure out why they weren't working anymore. But I was also looking at places around the world that were 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old, like in Rome. And seeing like there's plazas that were again, 2,000 years old, but still full of life. Young people, old people, fountains, markets. I'd see in Holland that there were grandparents riding bicycles with grandkids on little streets. And these little old buildings all around. So I was seeing these places that were made with legacies. And I was saying, man, people were really mindful a long time ago about building places that mattered, that people would still see and still want to go to and still want to activate. So I got on a plane, I got back to Dallas where I live, and I was like, well, what's our legacy? What are the things that we're building that we want to celebrate and hand out to future generations? And I saw a lot of these things, which was really depressing. So I thought, wow, we're spending billions of dollars on infrastructure that we'll never be able to ride a bicycle with my grandchild. I'm not going to go to a market. I'm not going to sit by a fountain in these spaces. So I decided, I'm going to start showing up and start going to City Hall and seeing if I can just start taking place in some planning initiatives. So, well, how can I take part in helping make change? And they said, first of all, I've heard that the city was like, they'd come to me and say, well, look, Dallas is not Paris. It's 100 degrees 3 months out of the year. We have a car culture. And I said, well, is there any way I can take part in helping? And they said, well, we do a lot of planning. So if you want to join a committee, you can go in and be part of the Forward Dallas plan. We've got Downtown Dallas 360 plans. We have bike plans from the 1980s that were never built. Maybe you can work on those. We have 2035 mobility plans. So that, for me, I saw that and thought, man, Dallas is going to be great in 2035. I hope I make it, right? So I realized that this is going to take way too long, take too much time. What maybe I need to start doing is just start showing up and joining every possible club and organization I can in my neighborhood to start taking part. So I started doing that. I started joining Lions clubs and Kiwanis clubs and Masons and Oddfellows. And I thought when you walk into a room full of people who look like this, your first thought is, I don't know if I belong here. I don't know if these are my people, right? But fortunately, I didn't leave the room when I found these groups. I realized that maybe these weren't the ideas people, but they were the people showing up that wanted to make things happen, and they were looking for people to take a charge so they could help support and make things happen. So one of the most important things I did was to stick around and work with these groups. One of the first projects I worked on, though, in the neighborhood was we had an old theater called the Texas Theater. And to give you a little background of where I live in Oak Cliff, Dallas, a neighborhood of Dallas called Oak Cliff, we had been considered the bad part of town for a half a century. And anyone who knows Dallas and knows Oak Cliff will know this. And part of that stigma came because we had some bad folks that were from our neighborhood. First of all, Bonnie and Clyde lived in our neighborhood. And second of all, Lee Harvey Oswald was from our neighborhood. In fact, this is the theater where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The only reason it has a sign is because Oliver Stone made the sign for the movie JFK. So I went to this theater and realized this is ground zero for problems in our neighborhood and why people think we're the bad side of town. I found a group that was working on a theater that was a little bored, and they said, I said, how can I help? They said, well, we did studies and we need about $3 million to fix the theater. I said, well, I don't have $3 million. And they said, well, we don't have any philanthropists coming into our neighborhood because it's the bad side of town. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe I can just show up and just start bringing friends out and like working with the arts community like I did in the music world that I was in. So I developed a project with some friends. We came together and we said, why don't we have everybody in the neighborhood come out? We're all going to give them 100 canvases. And everybody will come on the floor and they'll all paint one piece each. Well, 100 people have so one canvas each. So 100 canvases that we'll fill with art. And the next night, we'll display everything. I'll turn the theater into an instant art gallery. So in 24 hours, it'll go from a place that nobody went to an instant art gallery. And this is us inside the theater. Minutes before we're about to open the doors, we started thinking maybe this is going to be an abject failure. This theater's been closed for a decade. It's the middle of winter, and we're on the bad side of town. But when we opened the doors, we had 700 people show up. And we sold every piece of art we had created the night before. But beyond that, we had people come up to us afterwards and say, we've been waiting for somebody to turn the theater back on again. We've been waiting to get back inside this space and let the lights on and do things again. And I thought, I was waiting for someone to turn the lights back on in this space as well. So it was amazing to see. It just took somebody from a community coming in saying, like, hey, this is available. Let's access these things. Let's do these things. And realizing that we all have this desire. We go through these spaces all the time and we realize they're not working. And we feel like, well, it just takes money or it just takes a lot more resources and will never fix these problems. But I found that all communities have the same problems. They all have problems with resources and with money. But some are able to make things happen while others aren't. So I was trying to figure out, how do I gather communities together to make things happen more in my neighborhood? Within 3 months, I became the president of the Texas Theater. So I tell people, be careful when you say, hey, I want to help, because they will throw the keys at you. But in short order, we started actually making more things happen. We didn't have a screen in the theater, so we found a screen in the neighborhood, and we hung it up. And well, we didn't have a sound system for a while, so we found pianos from Craigslist. We brought pianos in, and we started showing silent films and had the neighborhood play piano to the silent films. And then after we exhausted kind of the entire Charlie Chaplin catalog, we had enough money to actually raise to put a sound system in the space. So now the theater's working. It's doing well. There's actually a group of guys that took over the space and are showing films regularly, has film festivals, and has become an anchor for our area. But while that was going on, I'm working on the theater, I started looking at old maps in the neighborhood, trying to figure out other projects we could work on to make more things happen. I attended a lot of community meetings. Everybody talked about things we needed to get people to come back to the neighborhood. And we always heard, we just need a Whole Foods, or we need a Chipotle. We heard that all the time. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can bring a Chipotle back. But I looked at these maps and started figuring out, well, what did our neighborhood used to look like, and how did it used to work? And I realized we had something interesting. These bold black lines in our neighborhood were our old trolley car or streetcar system that ran throughout our neighborhood. The interesting thing was, when we had this streetcar system, we had buildings like the Texas Theater had 650 seats, but only 35 parking spaces in the back. So it worked because of the streetcar system. And so when we pulled that out, it created all kinds of problems, right? So I started attending these public meetings and community meetings and talking about ideas to make things work again, and people had all kinds of ideas. I said, I've got an idea. Why don't we bring back the trolley car system? And people said, that's crazy. It's been gone for half a century, cost millions of dollars. It'll take us decades to pull something like that off. Again, I knew very little about streetcars or trolleys, but I was a computer guy. I knew how to make websites. So I went home at night and made a fake website called the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. That was really official. Had boards and news and history. I put European trolleys on the front. And the next week, the Dallas Morning News or newspaper did a story saying, dreaming of the day the streetcars return. That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority are hoping. But there were no other members. It was just me. But I had people call me from the neighborhood and say, like, hey, we got a transit authority? This is great. How can we help? And it turns out I had a guy in my neighborhood who was a civil engineer who was passionate about trolleys and said, I would love to dedicate my time and donate pro bono a feasibility study for this effort. So I'm like, that's a big deal. Then I had another guy, it was an 80-year-old guy in my neighborhood who had enough parts in his garage to build a streetcar. So I had a bunch of random characters in my community that we could activate. All right, while streetcars are going on, I'm working on this project. I'm thinking this is going to take me decades. And I started looking at other projects we take on. I started studying kind of bike networks as well, because a lot of the cities that had great active streetcar systems also had bike networks. But when I saw bicycling in Dallas, and we talked about bicycling in Dallas, what we always saw was this kind of this more like, it wasn't like I saw like in Europe where it was girls in dresses and guys in suits riding old heavy bikes. It was, when we bicycled in Dallas, we all wore spandex, and we went 300 miles and we started doping. That's the only way we knew how to bicycle in our community. So I said, okay, well, maybe we can start a bike group similar to the one with the streetcar organization, because it's getting a lot of interest. We'll call it Bike Friendly Oak Cliff, and we'll go out and advocate for getting more bike infrastructure in our community and doing more bike events. And I found out when you're the one guy in your neighborhood goes to City Hall and says, hey, I got this great idea. I'm going to take every road in our neighborhood and we're going to cut them in half. We're going to put bike lanes everywhere. You're going to have a lot of guys that look like this come out and say, no, no. I was, okay, I'm going to have a hard time convincing this guy to ride a bicycle, right? So I'm going to have to come up with another strategy, right, we can work on to see if we can get people to ride bicycles. So we said, well, why don't we just start throwing some fun rides? Doing things for fun. We'll go out and do historic history tours of our neighborhood. And since we're the bad part of town, we didn't have much to celebrate, so we said, why don't we all just follow the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald? So we announced the rides. Meet us at the grassy knoll, because that's where you meet when you're going to do these rides. We thought we'd maybe have 20 people if we're lucky, but what happened was we had 150 people show up for that first ride. And what you don't see is me looking terrified at the front of this line, because first of all, I didn't own a bicycle when we started Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. I just love the idea of having a bike culture. But I also thought I should not be leading 150 people to the bad side of town. And then also I thought, I am your computer guy. I am not a leader. I do not need to be leading any movement whatsoever. But I found out if you're passionate about something, you have everything it takes to become a leader. And people are waiting for someone to stand up in the neighborhood and say, hey, this is broken, this is a problem. Why don't we gather our resources, and why don't we put our time and energy together to start fixing these problems? And when we started doing that, we had an amazing collective force that could make a lot of things happen quickly. We started doing little projects. We realized, like, my kids' school, no kids were riding bicycles whatsoever. But when I was a kid, we all rode bicycles to school. Like, that's how we got around. And so I said, okay, my kids' school doesn't have bike racks even, so why don't we take punch cards, we'll give them to the kids, they ride bikes every day for a week, we'll punch the card every day, after the 5th day we'll all go out and we'll get root beer floats. We went from having 0 kids riding bicycles to, within a week, 100 kids were riding bicycles at a local school. And all we made were punch cards. It's really simple things we could do. We were also voted the worst city for bicycling in the entire nation. We had no bike infrastructure. There was no bike lanes or anything, and part of that was because the city's bike coordinator was vehemently opposed to bike infrastructure. It was a weird thing. And so we went from being the worst city, but after doing these little activations and getting people getting involved and fighting for these things, we went from having no bike lanes to that. This is the first bike lane in the city of Dallas that I helped co-design with some friends. So we were able to, the funny thing is we weren't the bike part of town, we just kept telling people we were the bike part of town, and it's funny how it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so people started moving into town, like, I think we're supposed to buy a bike, and I don't know why, and there's all these bike lanes everywhere. All right, so working on the theater and working on the streetcar, also working on bike infrastructure, I started looking at the blocks of buildings and wondering, why aren't these working anymore? And when I started analyzing the problems in these blocks, I found out a lot of interesting things. So first of all, I found out, well, I couldn't have a coffee shop here because the zoning changed from retail to light industrial. I can have an H&R Block, but I can't have a cup of coffee. We also changed the streets to be one-way, high-speed streets in the 1970s. We thinned the sidewalks, we took away the landscaping. You don't have to read all this, but no, we created all these laws and rules that either made it cost prohibitive or illegal to fix the block. So if you wanted flowers on the sidewalk, it was going to be $1,000 in permitting. If you wanted shade awnings over each window, $1,000 per window. If you wanted street cafes, it was going to be $1,000 times area, times market value, times 85%, times 12%. If you wanted merchandise on the sidewalk, so you wanted to have clothing stalls or book stalls or bikes for a bike shop, that's illegal. And if you really want to kill your street life, create a law that says it's illegal for crowds to gather on the sidewalk, which we have. And all those rules are from 1941. So we looked at that block, and we asked the city, like, why do we do these things? They're like, we don't know, we've just been doing it for so long, we just have to kind of follow these rules. So we said, well, obviously it's illegal for us to do anything to make this block come to life. So what would happen if we took a weekend and we broke every law we possibly could? So that's what we did. We painted our own bike lanes, we added our own cafe seating, we took buildings, we painted murals, we brought historic lighting out and put it throughout the streets. We took the empty buildings and put the businesses we wish we always had, so coffee shops and flower shops and bookstores, gift shops. And then we printed off the laws and the rules we were breaking. We invited our city staff and our mayor and said, come out to our better block. And they came out and we thought, we're all going to go to jail. But they came out and they're like, I don't know if we're supposed to be here. But they're like, you know, this is working much better. People are using these businesses. People are coming out using the streets. They're walking and they're bicycling. We'd much rather see these things. And a lot of amazing things started happening after the project. So we did this on a weekend just to test the idea out because we wanted to see things happen. We wanted to see how things could be. And what happened was, a lot of interesting things. First of all, businesses that we created temporarily as pop-ups became permanent. So one called Oil and Cotton has become so successful that as an anchor for our area, actually works closely with our Dallas Modern Museum of Art. So our neighborhood is now a regional voice for modern art. Also offers classes for kids, classes for adults, and art supplies. The buildings that had been empty for years on our block were leased. And then those rules, the zoning got changed. You voted unanimously to go back from light industrial to back to retail. The fees got reduced as well. So instead of $1,000 for cafe seating, it went to $100 for cafe seating. People said, well, that's great, but you did that when it was nice outside in the spring. But in Dallas, it gets to be 100 degrees 3 months out of the year. People won't want to go outside then. So I thought, okay, well, let's see if we can figure this out, because everyone blames climate on why they don't do things. But I've got examples in Austin and New Orleans where people are going outside in the heat. And in cold weather, I can find examples in Holland and Copenhagen. In rainy weather, I can see examples in Portland where people are going outside. People just have to figure out how to work with their environments and make them more as humane as possible. So let's take another block and we'll see if we can work on this in 100-degree weather. Had similar issues to the last one. We had broken up sidewalks on one side, no sidewalks on the other, empty buildings. There's a pole with nothing on it. Just this gray emptiness, right? So we came out with neighbors in the night and we brought out 42 trees. We brought out 100 bushes to create pedestrian islands so people would feel safer crossing the street and cars would slow in the Main Street area. We brought out decks or pallets from the trash behind the buildings and made decks so people could sit outside. Painted our own crosswalks. We put bikes on the pole. Because again, we told people we're the bike part of town, so we had to illustrate that. Then we put tables under the trees, and what happened was people sat for hours. In fact, we were told people would come through the area with friends and baby strollers and calling friends, you got to get out here. This is like Vancouver. This is not Dallas. But the thing is, people would not leave. And so by the end of the night, we could finally get everybody out, because we just did this project on a weekend. We took everything down afterwards. People who weren't from our neighborhood came out, didn't realize it was temporary, came out the next weekend to drive around with their friends, like, there's this great block here with all these trees and these great businesses, but I keep missing it. So we're right around here. This is the picture of the block actually built, finished with the neighborhood. So I like to show this because we had a lot of consultants come into our neighborhood and give us a lot of meetings, a lot of plans, a lot of renderings and drawings. And the thing is, often those renderings got rolled up, coiled up, put into a cardboard tube, and thrown into a shelf at City Hall and never built. And so our frustration is we were suffering from rendering fatigue, we called it. So we said, why don't we just build these renderings out ourselves? So the beauty of this project was, those aren't Photoshop trees, they're real trees. Those aren't Photoshop crosswalks, they're real crosswalks. They're not watercolor clouds. This is what our community built together. So we were able to try it out. And we got over everybody's worst case scenarios and fears of Carmageddon and end of business as we know it. Our thing was like, let's just try it. Maybe it will be horrible or maybe it'll be amazing, but we're not doing anything right now. We're just talking. So the Better Block was a chance for us to actually start experimenting a little bit. And the businesses that have been in the area for years started to see what we were doing and realized, like, oh, we can fix our places as well. So we had businesses that had bars on the windows and had weeds overgrown. They peeled those off and peeled up the bars, added seating, added landscaping. We had a building that had been empty for 10 years. They peeled off the mirrored glass, and the weeds and the graffiti were taken away, and it's now our local beer and wine mart. People also ask me what happens when you break all those laws and rules. This is my friend Scott, who helped me identify all the laws and rules we're breaking. Scott is now our city council member. And so I found there's a 1-to-1 correlation between breaking laws and becoming a public servant. So y'all hold your ears. What we found was it was really important for us to work really quickly. Right? So we found that there's a lot of momentum in neighborhoods when people get together, they want things to happen. But once they go through the natural channels to make change, all of this bureaucracy hits them in the face and then things just stop, right? And that bureaucracy usually is bound up in worst case scenarios and fears and assumptions of things that will happen. So we had one group that came up and said, we want to do a dog park. We see dog parks all over the world. They're very popular right now. And we want one in our neighborhood. In fact, we've seen them throughout in other places in our city, but we can't get them in our own community. So they went to city staff, and city staff looked at the rule books and said, our rules say it has to be on 3 contiguous acres of land. And it's going to take a series of environmental studies and other things to have to take place before we can build this dog park. So the group came to us and said, it's going to take us years. We don't have 3 contiguous acres of land in our neighborhood. And so they came to us and said, what would you guys do? And I said, well, why don't we just do it on an acre? There's this lot that we're standing across from that's got weeds overgrown. People are using it as a dumping ground. Like, why don't we just turn this into a dog park? And the group, and people, this is how people are just naturally bureaucratic, but they were like, well, this is a good idea. We'll have some meetings and we'll gather some funds, and maybe 6 or 7 months we'll try to test out and build a dog park. And I was like, well, why don't we just do it next weekend? So that's what we did. We copied the city of Dallas's official park signs and made our own park signs. We figured that dog parks aren't that complex. If you can build a fence, you can build a dog park, and we knew how to do that. And then we put swings out for kids, which we found out, honestly, if you make dog parks great, don't make them for dogs, make them for people. Because dogs just need a place to pee. But if you get a place that swings and you put kiosks out to sell coffee and benches, people will linger in those spaces longer and create more shade and things like that. So one of the big concepts that we came up with, which was kind of us just kind of poking the city in the eye, was this, City of Dallas's motto is think big, right? And we said, well, you know, that's great, City of Dallas, but think big, unfortunately, we found means that we're going to spend $150 million building a convention center hotel, or $120 million hiring an Italian architect that we hope is going to make a bridge that looks like a fish skeleton that's going to make 100 little things happen for us. But the reality was the places that I love around the world are these places in London and Paris and New Orleans, in Dallas, that have these little blocks that we go to regularly that have a coffee shop and a flower shop and a bookstore, and they've got great lighting, and they've got benches, and they've got pocket parks and maps, and as a community we can make 100 little things a lot faster when we do that one big thing. And I found you can use things from the hardware store to actually start changing places pretty quickly, things that are really inexpensive. White duct tape, I found, looks just like the thermoplastic paint cities use to paint stripes in the ground. I found that the straw wattles that construction use to keep erosion out of your gutters, we can make new curbs with those, so cars will make curvilinear moves or serpentine moves as opposed to high-speed straight moves. We found that we take the excess graphics on city buses, the giant wraps they put on those, and make crosswalks with those. And then we go to the city and we say, hey, this intersection is too fast and too dangerous, and people don't want to be around it. Can you help us fix it? And they can say it's going to take us years and millions of dollars. We'll say, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it on Saturday. And so we do it ourselves. So, and the great thing is now we've worked with our cities. So we started off as kind of this guerrilla arts group, but in short order, the city of Dallas started saying, like, this is a valuable tool to use to test ideas, to gather community, to try it before you buy it, see what happens. We're not making any assumptions that this is going to work or it's not going to work. We just want to see things happen. And we want to learn from those things and apply changes based on those things. Really what we're doing is the stuff that I learned in the IT world, which is called Scrum. You test and iterate ideas and prototype things, and then what works, you pull out and you build on that. And we weren't doing that in the planning world or the urban design world. We were coming up with abstract notions and looking at things from 5,000 feet up and trying to fix those problems. We weren't going down the block and fixing the problems that were right there in front of our faces. People also ask me, how do you get away with breaking all those laws and rules in broad daylight? I said, I found you can break any rule you want as long as you wear an orange vest. All right, so our work has taken us all over the place, and we've been very fortunate since we work all around the world, in fact. So, in fact, I was in Portugal and Lisbon and in Perth, Australia last month. We're doing projects. We've got projects, though, in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and all over. But I just can kind of give you an illustration of how we work here. I'm going to show you an example from a project in Akron, Ohio we did. So this was a community we went to, and anyone who's familiar with Akron, Ohio, they were the former tire capital of the country. So Detroit was cars, Akron tires. When that industry left, it really took the wind out of the sails of Akron. So they lost half their population. And when that happened, they were left with excess roadways, buildings that were empty, a lot of excess houses. So we got brought into the community and we're asked, okay, how would you fix this? And just so you guys know, we never know how things are going to be fixed. The way this works is we start talking to the community, we start interviewing people, we start walking around with the neighbors, and we start asking the questions like, what's missing? In fact, you've got surveys out there now, we need you all to fill out, but we ask, what's missing? What would make it better? What's your skill sets? Do you want to help? And we'll build ideas based on what the community wants to do. So we'll interview the community here. In this neighborhood, we found we had a bunch of Bhutanese refugees, and we had a bunch of Italian immigrants in the neighborhood. So we said, okay, why don't we build things that are reflective of the culture that lives here, right? And we'll help them create those things. We found there was a lady who wanted to make Bhutanese dumplings. So we found an empty building. We cataloged the empty buildings on the block. So we said, we'll give her a space to do her restaurant. Another group wanted to do a clothing shop. So they were working with refugees, with refugees textiles. So we'll make a clothing shop for them. We got another group that wants to do an art gallery. We'll give them a space. We'll turn another space into an international welcoming center. We'll do a cafe. And then we'll take the public spaces, the excess spaces or the gaps in the building edges, and we'll put in quality public spaces that are reflective of the Italian or the Bhutanese community. Then we started publishing workshops, and we'll do the same thing here with any project where we publish, like, come help us out for 2 hours on a Friday, make a bike lane with us. Or for 2 hours on a Saturday, help us make furniture out of pallets. Or help us build a stage on a Sunday for 2 hours. This is us working with the city crews in Akron, filling up their official city street equipment with kids' finger paint. And then working with neighborhood kids to use white duct tape to line the bike lanes with white duct tape. In 2 hours, we can make bike infrastructure that looks like the stuff you see in Portland and New York. Line it with shade trees as well. We can take the excess wraps off the city buses and make mid-block crossings and test those ideas out. This is an empty lot. It's been empty for decades. We took some dirt, some hay bales and volunteers, and turned it into an Italian piazza in 2 hours. Turned the turn lane for cars into a bocce ball court. This is a bank that had been empty for a long time. So we took the excess roadway and the weeds that were overground, cut those off, took some paint and some tires, and made a plaza. Took pallets from the trash that were getting behind the buildings and made decks, taught kids how they can use these reclaimed materials. This building was slated for demolition. We were able to show how it could turn into a business. So put a bike co-op into the space. And this is the block actually being used. So just 2 hours before this, the people that were riding the bike lane, many of them were helping us make the bike lane. So the people, all the edges that are enjoying the market spaces and the plazas and all, were helping us build these things. So the community came together and they said, these are the things we wish we had, and we just figured out ways to create those things. We stopped drawing pictures. We stopped making watercolors. We stopped doing sticky notes, and we got together and we started swinging some hammers. And that's what our work's all about here. So in fact, and you'll see, and we'll talk a little bit more about the timeline in a bit, but when we're back, we're going to be back here doing some work. We'll be lifting some stuff, and we're going to need a lot of help. To give you guys kind of an example of some other projects we've done we've worked in every example. So downtowns, urban, rural, suburban, exurban. This was a project we did in South Dakota, in Millbank, South Dakota. 5,000 people got together in a room, asked them what's missing, what would make it better. They said, we used to have an ice skating rink. We used to have actually a great popcorn and snack stand that an old veteran named Tommy used to run that we all went to after school, and we loved this place. But when Tommy died, it got boarded up. We'd love to bring that back to life again. We'd love to get businesses going on our block again. So we drew up the ideas on what the community wanted to do. We made an organizational framework. We found Tommy's popcorn stand in the back of someone's house, pulled it out, painted it again, got it put back in front of the lake. That we turned it into an ice skating rink with the community. And now this ice skating rink is being installed permanently with the neighborhood, with the extra padding and other kinds of things to actually make it stay colder longer and other things. So they've got businesses going back on Main Street again. They've got an arts walk that's happening as well. We just started that project a couple of years ago, but all we did again was give people a framework to work and make things happen that they already wanted to do. This is a group in Norfolk, Virginia that we worked with. They had an old blade sign on their block. They had this whole block. We were trying to figure out ways to get things happening again. They're like, first of all, we'd like to fix the blade sign, but it's been out for 35 years. And they said, we need $10,000 to fix it though. And we're like, well, we don't have $10,000. But we said, so there's an interesting philosophy we have. Honestly, if you want innovation, take a zero away from your budget. And people don't realize that we can make a lot of things happen if we just gather the community together, because every community struggles with resources, again, with funding. So we found out there was an electrician driving by the project who lived in the neighborhood. We said, hey, can you help us? And he's like, yeah, I got some spare time. I'll go ahead and wire the box in the back for you for free. So he wires the box for us. Turns out there was a guy in the neighborhood whose uncle owned a light bulb store, and so he provided light bulbs for us. And there was another guy in the neighborhood that had a crane who was renting just for the weekend, so he came out and brought his crane out, and then we were able to fix the sign for the neighborhood again in just, again, a matter of days, and for next to nothing. Now you can go to our website, betterblock.org, and see a lot of resources we have. So we publish all the work we do. We always try to find new innovative solutions and ideas in communities we work in, and try to figure out ways that we can publish them so other people can do these as well. So our dream is to find ideas and projects and unique things in these communities, put them out there so the kid in Duluth can say, hey, maybe I can do this as well. I saw these people doing it in this one neighborhood. Why can't I do this here? Because that was my frustration, is I was seeing great things happen around the world. I thought it'll never happen in my little neighborhood in Dallas. But we found a lot of interesting ways to make things happen. Like this is us working closely with the city of Detroit and their planning director who had never made bike infrastructure. This is us actually helping them paint bike lanes. Sometimes we get really creative. This is us trying to figure out how do we create bollards in the street. We found that bollards were pretty expensive, but I found toilet plungers were only about $2 a pop. So I can use liquid nails and toilet plungers and make bike delineators. And now it's funny, that whole toilet plunger thing has become a movement. You see cities do this all over. They're actually getting permanent ones built afterwards. They just test it out with these. This is us so we've gone full circle. We're back now into IT with the work that we've done. So this is our office in Dallas. We're in an old Conoco gas station, so the metaphor there is really fun. But we've gotten pretty big into digital fabrication now. So, because we're looking at ways that we can use new technologies to fix these places, because that's going to be the future of this stuff. The way we're going to build places is going to be using these new ideas. So, anyone who's familiar with digital fabrication probably hears of 3D printing. We also do laser cutting, CNC routing. You can take your blocks and you can model them and print them out. The amazing thing is, though, kids, 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds know how to use this stuff. You know how they know how to use your phones better than you do? Like, they can do the same thing with this stuff. They got the software, it's free from Google. They download things, they can model your block and fix them. They can take all the facades on your street out here, and they can rapidly print them off as well. They can take CNC routers, which we have in our office as well. If anyone's familiar with a CNC router, it's basically just imagine a large printer for plywood. You put plywood on it, it cuts out shapes out of the plywood. So it's just a cutting device to attach to a computer. So we have a CNC router in our office, and we met a group in London that was making houses with these things. The interesting thing is they put sheets of plywood on, it would cut out these shapes from their designs, and then you can notch things together with no glue, screws, or nails. It all friction fits together like a puzzle piece. And then those designs are all freely available, so I can download them in Dallas and make a house there, and I can modify those designs as much as I want as well. So we realized, well, if you can build a house with this stuff, you can build everything else on the block as well. The bus stop, and you can build the benches and the cafe seating and all those things. So we have a library on our website where you can go and download a lot of designs we have for free. There's just a handful of them. You can bring a sheet of plywood to a CNC router. You can find these all over the place now. There's maker spaces or fab labs, which are basically libraries with tools. And I know we've already talked to a few people. There's a couple people that know CNC routers here. We've got, this is how it looks basically. You put a sheet of plywood on, you download the file, you let the cutting machine go, you go have a cup of coffee, 45 minutes later you come back, and you can have a fully assembled cafe seating set, 2 chairs and a table. We have coffee kiosks, flower kiosks, magazine stands. This is tables and chairs, 2 sheets of plywood. These are park benches that we did in St. Paul, Minnesota. We try to make them easy enough to where an 8-year-old can assemble them. So this is an 8-year-old putting them together. These are bulb outs that we made with a waffle pattern. So we can rapidly test the idea of making it, shortening the distance for pedestrians to cross and to slow cars as well, so the area feels safer. It worked so well that in Austin, there was a 9-year-old boy that was hit by a car. So they called us up and said, we want to download the designs. They downloaded the designs, and they installed our bump outs in their neighborhood to show how they can make it safer for the kids to cross in the area. So the city would see an example of what they wanted to be done, made permanently. We work closely with schools as well, high schools. We're trying to develop workforce training programs to teach kids how to do digital fabrication. So we found the kids that know this stuff, just know a little bit about this, can get a very well-paying job right out of high school. So this is us working with inner city high school kids. They can download the designs, or can modify them, make new legs and new features, and put their names into them. And then us working in their school courtyards and teaching them the basics of urban planning and how to fix their school's courtyard. So we have to start with benches. So we show them how they make that. Bus stops, we've got, this is a project in Tallahassee where we got community garden boxes. We copied Paris's beautiful bulletin columns. This is a facade that we developed. And that Better Block project that we started back in 2010, because just because I wanted to have a place to get a cup of coffee and ride a bicycle lane in my neighborhood, started getting really popular, right? And so people started calling me, asking me, can you help us do better blocks in our neighborhood? And I was like, well, I'm a computer guy. I don't have time to work on blocks, but I'll publish a guide. So I made a how-to guide online, and open sourced it so anybody can do a better block. So within the first year, it started going all around the country. And the next year, it started going all around the world. So it went from Melbourne, Australia, all the way to Tehran, Iran. And some people, when people from Tehran, Iran called me and asked me about breaking laws, I was like, I don't know about breaking laws. Tehran, Iran. The stakes are a little higher. All right, go back to the streetcar story. So this is my team, because y'all probably, what happened to that streetcar thing? So this is us in Portland with our little board of directors, and we formed a legitimate nonprofit group to advocate bringing the streetcar back, and we're studying Portland streetcar, met with officials who brought theirs back and said it took us 20 years, but it's worth it. To put the time and energy into it. It may not work, but you're gonna meet a lot of great people, you're gonna do a lot of great things. So we go to Portland, we come back home to Dallas, and we talk to the city of Dallas and say, hey, we want to start applying for some grants and see when we bring the streetcar back. And they laughed at us and said, okay, Oak Cliff Transit Authority, apply for all the grants you want. That's fine. So we found one grant called the Tiger Grant. It was the first year they'd ever done it. We had 0.3% chance of getting any money whatsoever. But what happened was we won millions of dollars. And instead of taking 15, 20 years to bring back the streetcar, we brought it back in 5. And all I did was build a website. But we dramatically changed the landscape of our community for the next 100 years. There are very real buildings now in our neighborhood that are all built along the spine of this streetcar. So we just gathered the community. We've heard enough times people say, like, there's no way you can do this, Oak Cliff can't do this, why would you guys think you could do this? But it was amazing. I tell people, beware of a dedicated group of amateurs. Because we don't know what we're not supposed to know. And it was amazing to see the community get fired up and to all come together and make these things happen. In short order, we started doing a lot of other projects. We found this really cool way to make things happen quickly. So I got together with my friends in the Better Block and we made a restaurant. So you go to my neighborhood, you go to a restaurant that's really successful. But then I started getting to lecture at Harvard. I had to have dinner with the First Lady. I decided to run for U.S. Congress because I had a free April. We got the Venice Biennale. Like, all this great stuff was happening. And I was thinking, like, man, what can stop us? We found this great ways to make things happen quickly in our neighborhood. But the one thing that completely stopped me was in 2012, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. And then everything stopped. And at that point, I remember thinking, like, all right, I'm not going to watch my kids grow up. I'm not going to get to ride the streetcar. I'm not going to get to see these businesses grow that we helped develop in the neighborhood. And when I was at my sickest, and anyone who's been through this knows what this is like, and you're just loaded up with chemotherapy and you're on the floor and you can't move, people started knocking on the door in my neighborhood that all helped build better blocks. And they started filling up my refrigerator with food. They took my daughter out shopping. They took my son fishing. And I tell people, what I got out of the Better Block was a neighborhood. And that's why we're doing all of the stuff that we're doing, everything. And so I tell people, when I was at my sickest and I needed help, I was amazed at what happened by just this galvanized community that needed me as much as I needed them. And they started doing amazing things for me. They started developed a Build a Better Jason campaign to help me kind of pay off my bills. They were very wonderful. And before I forget, in 2014, I was diagnosed as being cancer-free, so I'll be just fine. So, I sometimes forget to tell people that, they think, oh man, he's dying on stage. It's awesome. All right, so how do we do all that stuff? I had 3 simple rules we created to make things happen, all right? So the first thing I found is you have to show up. That's why I said I joined every club, every organization. I attended every meeting. I found out if you don't show up, she will, and she's opposed to everything. Second of all, you got to give your project a name, something that people can fight for, something they can hold on to. Work with your design communities. Make things look authoritative, like our Oak Cliff Transit Authority and our streetcar, our bicycle organizations, and the art projects that we did in the theater. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is we set short dates and we publish it. We blackmail ourselves into action. So if we don't set short dates, if we say we're going to do something in 12 months, we're going to come up with every worst case scenario on why we can never pull these things off. But if we set short dates and we publish it, and we'll spend a week or two like putting together the poster, and then we put it out there, we're going to do this project in 90 days. People are like, how in the world are you going to do that? I'm like, I have no idea. But people start calling and saying, hey, I'm a cook, or hey, I'm a construction worker, or hey, I work with flowers, or whatever. And we start making better blocks together with the neighborhood based on the resources and the skills that come out and the ideas from you, the community. So these are only successful when the community comes together and says, this is important for us. We know things are broken and we want to make things better. And I found with those 3 things, you can pretty much fix everything. And that's it. Thanks, guys. Do you want to talk about logistics at all or anything like that on what we have coming up? So, Monica, why don't I have you come up here? So I've got 2 of my team up here, Monica Diodati, Patrick Blades. Monica is the project manager who's going to help with this project, but we're working very closely with the community. I'm going to let you kind of talk a little bit.
Hi, so most of you should have had these little surveys on your chair. If you didn't get one, there are more right there where Patrick is. This is kind of an abbreviated version of the community survey that we'll have up for the next 3 weeks. We just kind of wanted to have something for you to have here tonight to fill out while the ideas are fresh in your mind. But there's also a much more detailed version of this at betterblock.org/Ottumwa. And there'll just be a button that says take the survey, and you can kind of give a lot more details about how you want to see Better Block play out in this community, and your impressions of downtown, what you'd like to see change, what you love about it, who we should be talking to and bringing into the mix, and things like that. And if you'd like and you have some extra time, since we're right on the block that we're going to be working on, we'd love to just step outside, do a little lap around the block, and kind of with these survey questions in mind, maybe you can just, with the ideas of Better Block and actually looking at the block we're working on, answer the questions through that lens, and maybe we can talk about potential interventions along the way as well. So grab a few refreshments, get your surveys, and maybe we can meet outside in 10 minutes or so and do a little lap. Also, feel free to head out if you have time constraints or anything like that. So, thank you.
So what did everybody think?
Great.
Pretty awesome. So one of the big things that I love about Main Street is this. It's so inspirational, and this is what Main Street's about. You know, it's our town, and it's going to be us that make the difference. So thank you all for coming tonight. Let's go out and think of some great ideas. If you know people that want to help us, certainly sign them up. And then the actual event or the activity will be taking place in October, but this survey that Monica was talking about is online now, and will be up until August 15th, I think. So make sure you take that, and thanks everybody for coming tonight.
Thank you.